One heartbeat, one breath, one moment changes everything for Jaden, an underdog battling unseen in the urban sprawl. When his silent scream becomes a roar, will the city stand with him or watch him fall? Amidst the relentless hustle of the city, young Jaden threads through the crowds with a quiet determination that belies his 11 years. His clothes, threadbare and patched, whisper tales of survival on streets that offer little sympathy. His shoes, worn and tattered, trace the map of his daily struggles against the unforgiving concrete of the urban jungle. Jaden's eyes, bright and observant, reflect a defiance against his harsh reality. Each day, as he navigates the indifference of the bustling city, he carries a steadfast hope that glimmers like a rare gem in the rough. His presence is almost ethereal, easily overlooked by those absorbed in their own routines, yet deeply significant to the fabric of the neighborhood. In Jaden, the city holds a paradox. A young soul with the weight of the world on his slender shoulders, yet buoyed by an unyielding spirit that refuses to be crushed. His daily odyssey from dawn to dusk is not just a quest for sustenance, but a silent protest against the invisibility imposed upon him by societal neglect. As the city roars around him, Jaden moves with a purpose that stirs the air, a reminder that even in the most overlooked corners, there lies a story of resilience and hope waiting to be told. For those who did notice, Jaden's presence served as a reminder of all they were unwilling to acknowledge. A black boy, his filthy clothes, and homelessness. They only ever saw the streaked face, his eyes full of piercing intelligence, but never the generosity that persisted in his heart. Despite everything, Jaden was merely a statistical figure, someone from the outside who didn't belong in their world. Jaden couldn't help but notice the busy crowds that streamed by him, people moving in every direction, each person engrossed in their own lives, unconcerned with his presence. The steady, sharp click of stiletto heels, phones beeping, the hum of conversations, all combined to create a symphony of apathy. He was just another hardly worth a second look in the crowd. Nobody cared about the boy who walked in the dark, yet there was still one person who was different from the others. Sarah Mitchell was moving at a fast pace, her stance with her co-workers at her sides. Sarah exuded confidence and authority. She was regarded as a respected and strong woman who had merited her position at the top. Her co-workers murmured in admiration as she navigated the crowded streets, encircled by the type of admiration Jaden could only hope for. Her heels clicked and her clothing was immaculate, with a cadence that complemented her steadfast faith in her world. There was no space for uncertainty. Without hesitation, she was in charge, and nobody could contest that. But even Sarah Mitchell, with everything she had, was exposed in this crowded, uncaring city after leaving a meeting. Her stride with significant figures faltered when a food fragment lodged in her throat. She coughed because of it. She seized her throat violently with both hands, panic flaring over her face as she let out a gasp. Her co-workers initially failed to notice, the crowd going about their typical manner, hardly giving her a glance. How Sarah's breathing and face changed became shallow as she struggled to clear her throat, but the choking was useless. The feeling grew stronger, and her hands shuddered as she gasped for air that wouldn't arrive on the crowded street, crowded with those who passed by without a second thought. In despair, drowning out the city's sounds, Sarah's silent screams for help went unnoticed. The world is typically so regulated and confident was suddenly evaporating from her hands. She needed help. But the people surrounding her, unaware of the danger she was in, ignored her and kept on walking. It was the woman fighting for her life. Sarah then staggered forward, holding the spot on her throat where Jaden's gaze fell. He was standing at the edge and caught a glimpse of her in the audience, observing the street mayhem in front of him. A flurry of individuals couldn't divert his attention from the woman's distress. Something warned him this wasn't the race. The woman needed help, and at the time, despite his own hardships, Jaden's intuition took over. He couldn't watch helplessly while the city disregarded him. Jaden was unwilling to disregard someone else's pain. Jaden fixed Sarah with his gaze as her face reddened as she gasped for oxygen. His heart pounded in panic, yet his body responded instinctively. He had seen people choking before while eating, smoking, living, and in those instances, Jaden had discovered the value of speed. But he didn't pause without considering the crowd. It was frozen in disbelief. He forced through them, swerving between those who were too shocked to respond to the sounds of the city's noise of shuffling feet, and the sound of voices diminished. There was just one thing in his thoughts: Sarah's frantic attempt to breathe. Jaden arrived at her in a matter of seconds. He was small, yet he had powerful arms from living on the streets for years. He firmly placed his hands on Sarah's abdomen, similar to what he had seen in films with street footage. His heart was racing, and although his hands were sweaty, his palms were steady. He delivered the initial forceful stroke. Sarah's face remained unchanged, her mouth open in silence, pale. In desperation, the crowd started whispering. Once more, some voices raised doubts. People approached cautiously, but Jaden did not know what to do, and took a deep breath, forced more forcefully, and with a final, powerful push against the obstacle, Sarah's eyes widened as she came loose, abruptly gasped for air, and coughed fiercely. She jolted forward as the particle of food flew out of her throat, and she dragged into a very desperate moment to appreciate the surroundings. Sarah stood there as if frozen, still stunned, her hands gripping her throat. But she was breathing again. The instantaneous panic on her face gradually changed into a state of relief as she observed Jaden's eyes widened with shock, that she could breathe. She gazed at him with her hands and voiced a hoarse, still trembling. However, her face was one of astonishment. She had been protected from the crowd that had stood in awed stillness and started to whisper once more. But this time it was distinct. There was no derision, no judgment. They were mute in astonishment for a second of what Jaden had just done. Jaden, the boy who had just been invisible for a few moments, had saved one of the most powerful people in the city. The numbers of viewers awaited the next action from someone else. Jaden's hands stood in startled quiet, were still trembling, and his heart was pounding in his chest. Yet he was unfrightened. The one thing he had done that his instincts were true and important had begun, and he had taken what had to be completed while Sarah was still alive. Sarah repeated, "Thank you," in her voice. She broke down in tears and reached out to her hands, remained motionless. Jaden stood shakily, uncertain of how to respond. His life had been occupied with moments of survival and terror, but now here, he had made a difference. The audience recognizing what had happened, and started to shift their gazes from skepticism to admiration. However, Jaden was too busy to see them, absorbed in observing Sarah as she gradually recovered her poise. "I didn't know what to do," Sarah said in a whisper. "You saved my life, but my voice is still strained." Nodding, Jaden's chest swelled with pride, but it wasn't about acknowledgement. It wasn't about demonstrating what was wrong. It was doing what was correct, and he had done so. The atmosphere, as Sarah stood, unable to breathe of the crowd, changed what started, as the awe-stricken stillness soon changed into whispers of Jaden stood a few feet away, uncomfortable. Heaving in his chest, he caught his breath, still assimilating what had simply occurred to him. Racing, the situation's weight was he had saved her, and he was beginning to settle in. He had kept the FBI safe. "Chief," but as the whisper grew louder, Jaden's triumphant moment soon turned sour. He had sensed the stares before those of fear and suspicion now shifted to even worse, making fun of a white woman in the crowd with her lips and arms folded, curled in contempt and uttered a harsh snort. "Why is a child like him even touching her?" her voice said. Brimming with disdain, searching for John's gut, twisted in response to the words, struck him in the chest like stones. He had taken a positive action and saved a life, and yet he was being denigrated here. He searched for it in the hopes of finding someone who would take over, but the crowd only became more antagonistic toward a man, wearing an arrogant outfit and a costly suit. Expression cast a downward glance at Jaden, a contemptuous sneer. What is he even aware of? About saving lives, most likely just wanted to observe that his tone was judgmental, as even though Jaden's existence itself was the man's remarks hurt more deeply beneath him. More intense than Jaden has ever experienced. As Jaden stood, his fatigue increased. Attempting to overlook the harsh comments, the crowd went on without being confronted by Sarah's existence was made possible by his snap decisions were based on greater than Sarah's voice of relief. Jaden added a woman behind him, you know. Voice brimming with incredulity. He's simply what kind of hero could a homeless child be? The words reverberated in Jaden's ears. causing him to get confused and annoyance that they failed to recognize him for who to them, he was just a kid of color. From the streets, identical to any others, they were unable to see beyond their presumptions, they were unable to see His eyes were filled with compassion and desperation. He had felt the selflessness to save her. That prompted him to take a stand, Jaden silently taking in all of the crowd's words. He had done what they had done, slashing deeper. Couldn't understand something they hadn't even considered doing. But it didn't matter because they didn't care about the truth. They weren't intrigued by the reality that he had acted during a period of they just saw his skin amid the crisis. Poverty, his upbringing. And the reason considering that, he was merely He looked at the difficulty in their minds. At Sarah, who was motionless, a few feet away. Suddenly, her eyes were brimming with thankfulness as her respiration gradually returned to normal. But she remained silent. Rather, the area surrounding them filled with the mockery of those who were unable to observe the circumstances as they actually were. Most likely believes he is a hero, now that someone whispered just loudly enough behind Jaden. Want him to listen to what he believes where everyone will be grateful to him for that. Jaden's tightened his hands at his sides. But he kept quiet since he understood that arguing alongside them would be useless because they had already decided their thoughts about him. And he was unable to speak would alter that Jaden briefly experienced the weight of their savagery, but then as he quickly recalled his motivation for acting. He had taken action to save Sarah. Correct. Regardless of how they perceived him. That wouldn't take anything. Sarah stood tall and still, shuddering from the surprise of nearly she was dying, but her eyes were now engulfed with flames. The remaining pieces of fear had subsided and been replaced by an amazing feeling of clarity as the audience kept muttering their derision. With her eyes fixated on Jaden, she may sense the consequences of their decision. She wiped her mouth like a thick robe, still experiencing the persistent constriction in when she drew a steadying breath, and as she took a breath and looked at the crowd, her eyes pierced them like a blade, her jaw firmly fixed on resolve. The whispers wavered and the gang entered an awkward stillness. She moved forward and spoke. Solid and brimming with this child's authority just saved my life. She spoke, her voice piercing the air like a thunderclap. What are you doing at the moment is repulsing the public. Stopped the taunts and derision that had being directed toward the tossed Jaden negligently into the area surrounding them. Felt abruptly unimportant in the midst of Sarah's stirring remarks. She wasn't merely speaking on Jaden's behalf. She was on behalf of everyone who had ever been assessed according to their looks, their history, or the hue of their skin. She moved forward one more step, voice getting louder by the second. You notice a destitute black child, and you presume right away that he's nothing but observe him. He is the only person present who had the guts to pretend that you didn't notice he's valuable despite his skin color. Greater than you altogether. She words hit her in the stomach like a fist. The spectators' gaze were silent. Now broad with understanding that they hadn't merely made fun of Jaden, they had lost the chance to observe a hero directly in front of them, a young man who had shown courage when nobody else is around. Would Sarah look at Jaden instead? Her admiration for him is clearly evident. Switched her voice back to the audience. Steadfast as she went on, don't you? He is a hero only because you dare to evaluate him. It doesn't matter that he looks different from you. Regardless, her words reverberated in the hush that suddenly enveloped a clear reminder of the prejudice in the audience. It had obscured their thoughts just a few seconds prior. Jaden stood there with his heart racing. He did what no one else could do for her. Or would. And Sarah is now someone who powerful and well-respected was taking a stand. He found it hard to comprehend that the doubt and shame had overtaken him. Earlier started to diminish the spectators who previously eager to pass judgment were now looking at Jaden with a distinctive awareness. Some people averted their eyes from him, ashamed by what they said earlier. Others appeared to consider after Sarah finished speaking. There was a long pause. As the golden hues of sunset washed over the bustling city streets, a remarkable transformation unfolded at the heart of the crowded square. The air, usually thick with the hustle of daily life, hung heavy with a newfound realization as the crowd gathered around Jaden and Sarah in a semicircle of contemplative silence. Sarah, whose authority was always apparent, now exuded a warmth and admiration for the young hero beside her. Clearing her throat, she addressed the onlookers, her voice resonating with a deep respect that commanded attention. "Today," she began, her eyes sweeping over the diverse faces, "we have all been part of a pivotal moment. A moment where a young boy, Jaden, not only saved a life, but also shattered the barriers of prejudice and indifference that too often cloud our judgment." Jaden, standing slightly behind Sarah, felt a surge of emotions as her words echoed around him. The weight of the FBI badge in his hand felt heavier than ever, symbolizing not just a recognition of his bravery, but also his transition from anonymity to a symbol of change. His once downcast eyes now gleamed with a mixture of pride and determination, reflecting the internal shift from a life of survival to one of influence. Sarah continued, her tone becoming more impassioned. "This child, who many might have overlooked, has shown us the essence of true heroism. It's not always about the grand gestures, but often about noticing the unnoticed, acting when others hesitate, and caring when it's all too easy to remain indifferent." The crowd, moved by her eloquence, nodded in agreement, their faces showing a range of emotions from shame to newfound respect. Whispers of apology and admiration filled the air, weaving a tapestry of communal remorse and resolve to do better. "Let this day be the beginning," Sarah urged, "of a new chapter in our community, one where we not only recognize but also nurture the potential in each other, regardless of background, appearance, or circumstance." Her proposal was met with applause, a sound that rang out like a clarion call for change. As the applause died down, Sarah proposed practical steps to ensure the momentum wasn't lost. "We will start community initiatives focused on supporting local heroes like Jaden. Programs that provide not just accolades but real support, educational scholarships, mentorship programs, and platforms for these young voices to be heard," she outlined, her gaze intense and hopeful. The response was immediate and enthusiastic. Business leaders nodded in agreement, educators whispered excitedly about collaboration, and local officials promised support. The energy was electric, signaling a shift towards a more inclusive and proactive community. Jaden, overwhelmed by the support, felt his resolve strengthen. He realized that his actions could inspire not just momentary change, but lasting transformation. The crowd's reaction was a testament to the power of individual acts to influence broader societal norms. As the event concluded, the crowd began to disperse, but the sense of community lingered. Many approached Jaden, offering thanks, apologies, and promises of support. Each handshake, each smile, each kind word added layers to his new reality as a community hero. Sarah, watching the interactions, felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She had not only helped save her life, but had also played a part in transforming a young boy's life from one of hardship to one of hope and opportunity. In the days that followed, the impact of that evening rippled throughout the city. Local newspapers and online platforms buzzed with the story of Jaden's bravery and the community's response. Debates about racism, heroism, and community support filled social media, sparking further discussions and actions. Jaden found himself at the center of a whirlwind of activities: interviews, invitations to speak at events, and opportunities to engage with leaders and influencers. With Sarah's guidance, he navigated this new world with the same courage and humility that had defined his actions on that fateful day. As weeks turned into months, the initiatives Sarah had proposed took shape. Jaden was involved in every step, from planning to execution, ensuring that the programs reflected the needs and hopes of the community's youth. He became not just a symbol of change, but an active participant in driving it. Jaden's journey from a marginalized existence to a celebrated community figure was not just a story of personal success, but a beacon of hope for many who had felt invisible. His legacy was now intertwined with the city's identity, a reminder that heroism can often come from the most unexpected places. The city that had once seemed so vast and indifferent now felt like a network of interconnected lives, each capable of heroism, each deserving of recognition. Jaden's story was a powerful narrative of redemption and empowerment, a narrative that would inspire and shape generations. As the year drew to a close, Jaden walked through the same streets where he had once felt invisible, now greeted by nods and smiles of recognition. He wasn't just Jaden the hero. He was Jaden, the young man who had awakened a city to its better angels, proving that even in the darkest corners, there lies a light waiting to be kindled.